Hey folks, today we're going to be starting the Odyssey. I'm very excited about this. I love Homer's Odyssey. It's a fabulous book. We're going to be reading the translation by Robert Fitzgerald from 1967. We talked about translations just a second ago. It's the translation that's available online. We're going to be reading the textbook version, the kind that's in your textbook that you would be using in class if you had access to it. It is a significantly condensed version of the Odyssey. If you look at this, the Odyssey as written here is a 506-page document with it's got little drawings in it. It's cool. Relatively little font. It's not big writing, big spacing, or anything like that. So it's a hefty book. It's a long book. And if you look here, you can see just above me that um, you got 104 pages of text as opposed to 500. Also, this starts on page 20. There's literally 20 pages of um, build up and helping you understand the Odyssey stuff before this in the book, which we're not going to look at because I've already done that with you and prepped you by giving you a history of the Trojan War and um, a whole mythology unit and some terms on epic heroes and heroic epic and oral tradition and all kinds of stuff. So we're all good to go. We're all ready to start reading the Odyssey and understanding the Odyssey. But we're going to skip significant portions of it, and I'm going to have to be responsible to sort of fill you in on what you missed. So, without further ado, we're going to pick up where this starts on book one. A goddess intervenes, and then we'll read and get to a good stopping place for the day. So I'm hoping to make each of these videos somewhere between half an hour and 45 minutes long, but I want to get to a good stopping place each time instead of just abruptly ending at a random location. So part one, the wanderings of Odysseus. That's technically not part one of the actual novel or the actual epic, but we'll get there. Book one, a goddess intervenes. Remember, it starts with the invocation of the Muses. The Muses are these daughters of Zeus who are responsible for inspiration of poets or painters or storytellers or whatever. Sing in me, Muse, and through me tell the story of that man skilled in all ways of contending, the wanderer, harried for years on ends after he plundered the stronghold of the proud height of Troy. He saw the townlands and learned the minds of many distant men, and weathered many bitter nights and days in his deep heart at sea, while he fought only to save his life, to bring his shipmates home. But not by will nor by valor could he save them, for their own recklessness destroyed them all, children and fools. They killed and feasted on the cattle of Lord Helios the sun, and he who moves all day through the heaven took from their eyes the dawn of their return. Now of these adventures, Muse, daughter of Zeus, tell us in our time, lift the great song again. And then, like the book does this thing where it gives you sort of italics and it says, the story of Odysseus begins with the goddess Athena's appealing to Zeus to help Odysseus, who has been wandering for 10 years on the seas, to find his way home to his family on Ithaca. While Odysseus has been gone, his son Telemachus has grown to manhood, and his wife Penelope has been besieged by suitors wishing to marry her and gain Odysseus' wealth. The suitors have taken up residence in her home and are constantly feasting on the family's cattle, sheep, and goats. They dishonor Odysseus and his family. Taking Athena's advice, Telemachus travels to Pylos for word of his father. Meanwhile, on Ithaca, the evil suitors plot to kill Telemachus when he returns. And then all of a sudden you jump to book 5. And that's kind of too big a jump, and that's not enough information for you to go on. What they've done is they've skipped the first 78 pages of the story, and they're going to jump right into the story of Odysseus himself. The Odyssey, even though it's named after Odysseus, actually starts on Ithaca, his homeland, with his son Telemachus and his wife Penelope, and there's a significant amount of background. So let me go through this and try and build this up a little bit so you understand what you're missing. So here it says the story of Odysseus begins with the goddess Athena appealing to Zeus to help Odysseus. This is true. Athena likes Odysseus. Odysseus has been lost at sea for 10 years and has not been allowed to return home because Poseidon, the god of the sea, is pissed off at him. We'll find out why shortly. Homer doesn't tell you. But it turns out that Poseidon is going to Egypt for some big festival that they have there. And so he's going to be gone for a week or two. And while he's gone, Athena asks Zeus to allow Odysseus to get home. And that way, Poseidon will be none the wiser, and Odysseus will have slipped by. And so Zeus does agree to this. And so what ends up happening is he sends a messenger down to Odysseus. Hermes, the messenger god, goes down to Odysseus. Odysseus is living on an island with Calypso, and they convince Odysseus to build a raft and to escape. We're going to see that, I think, in the next section. If not, I'll summarize it better there. But it says, while Odysseus has been gone, his son Telemachus has grown to manhood, and his wife Penelope has been besieged by suitors wishing to marry her. We talked about that a little bit before. All these guys want to marry Penelope because if they marry her, they get to be king of Ithaca, and she's still an attractive woman. But they're more interested in the power and the prestige and the wealth of her house. And so they've all sort of camped out at her house, relying on her hospitality to feed and clothe them. And she can't really turn them away because she's a woman, and Telemachus can't really turn them away because he's a minor. And they want to marry Penelope before Telemachus comes of age, and she's trying to stall until her son Telemachus comes of age because then he can become king. And so they're in this awkward situation where the suitors are trying to force her to choose one of them, and she uses a number of stratagems to try and keep them from keep herself from having to marry one of them. And the one that was the most successful is she decided to sew a funeral shroud for Laertes, Odysseus's father, who's not dead yet. And she said she would marry one of them as soon as she finished the shroud. Well, she would sew all day, and then she would unravel it at night. And through that, she was able to hold them off for like 3 years or something like that. But right at the beginning of the story, they figured out what she was up to, and so she's now in a position where she's going to be forced to marry one of them. So the suitors are besieged is a good word. They're sort of laying siege to Odysseus' house, not in a physical way but they're all camped out there, and they're sort of threatening and dangerous, and they're eating up all of Odysseus' cattle and abusing his hospitality. So then it says they dishonor Odysseus and his family. Taking Athena's advice, Telemachus travels to Pylos for word of his father. Like that's skipping a huge amount. So Telemachus is a young man. He's not officially of age yet. He doesn't really have any authority, but he's been more and more angry about the way the suitors have been treating his mother, about the way things have been going. And so he is tossing and turning in a dream one night, and Athena comes to him in a dream, just like Bellerophon in that story we read earlier. And she encourages him to talk to the suitors and essentially say he's going to go try and find word of his dad. And if he finds out that his dad is alive, then the suitors all have to leave. If he doesn't find out, or if he finds out that his dad is dead, when he comes back, they'll marry Penelope. And so he decides to outfit a boat and sail off and try and find word of his father, Odysseus. Athena actually takes a shape of an old man in town whose name is Mentor, and advises Telemachus and helps him in the shape of Mentor. This is where the meeting the mentor phase of the hero's journey gets its name. And so Telemachus does. He fits out a ship. He gets a crew. This old man Mentor, who's really Athena in disguise, goes with him, and they sail away and they go looking for word of Odysseus. And so their best bet is to go see some of the lords who returned from the Trojan War to find out what information they can. And the nearest of these Greek warlords who had fought at Troy is this guy named Nestor, who was actually the youngest man on the crew of the Argonaut. He's a really old man now, and he lives in a place called Pylos. So Telemachus goes off to Pylos, where he meets Nestor and Nestor's son, and is treated with respect, and he equally treats them with respect. Nestor says he doesn't have any good information on Odysseus, but the man who was the last to return from Troy, who returned 5 years ago, who may know something of Odysseus and whether he's alive or dead, is Menelaus. Menelaus is king of Sparta, if you recall. And so what Nestor does is he gives a chariot to Telemachus and lends him his son as a guide. And Telemachus and Nestor's son ride off to Sparta, where they meet Menelaus and Helen. This directly goes back to the Troy story. And they exchange greetings and gifts, and Telemachus is treated with respect because of who his father is, and hospitality. And there's a display of how you should behave as a Greek. And Menelaus then tells him this story. Menelaus says that it took him 5 years to get home. He ended up marooned in Egypt, and the only way that he could get safe passage back to Greece was he had to sneak up on Proteus, the old man of the sea, this minor Greek sea god who could turn into anything, any sea creature. Like basically you're walking on the beach, you see a seagull. Is it a seagull or is it Proteus? Is that a starfish or is it Proteus? Proteus apparently liked to turn into a walrus and sleep with the walruses, or the seals or something like that. And so Menelaus goes and he sneaks up on him and ends up wrestling him. And he keeps turning into these things. He turns into a seal, and then he turns into a sea lion, then he turns into a fish and a whale and a shark and a crab. And Menelaus continues to wrestle him even though he's changing shape into all these sea creatures. A pretty cool story. Whatever the case, he ends up, winning the wrestling contest with Proteus, and then Proteus has to do what Menelaus asks, and Menelaus asks to get a passage home, but he also asks for news about all of his compatriots or fellows, because Proteus is in the ocean. He knows everything that happens in the ocean, and so Proteus tells him. And so Menelaus knows that Odysseus isn't dead, and he says he feels in his bones that Odysseus is going to be coming home soon. And so Telemachus then leaves Sparta and heads back to Pylos. But something's going on with the suitors while this is happening. The suitors have been very disrespectful and treated Telemachus and Penelope very badly. They're sleeping with Odysseus's maids and, all kinds of negative things. But the leader of the suitors, whose name is Antoninus? No, I'm going to look it up. Pretty close. His name is Antinous. The leader of the suitors, and the worst one of them all, is this guy named Antinous. And Antinous has this idea. He, after Telemachus leaves, he's like, well, you know what? We solved this problem in two ways simultaneously. We'll get the 50 best of us, the best suitors there are, and we'll outfit our own ship. And we'll go and sail to an island that's off the coast of Ithaca that every ship coming back to Ithaca from Pylos will pass. And as Telemachus passes by, we'll attack his ship. We'll sink it, we'll murder him, and he'll just be lost at sea like his dad, never return. And when Telemachus doesn't come back, then Penelope's going to have to marry one of us, and without the threat of Telemachus, we will be, whoever she chooses, king of Ithaca. And so they get the best warriors together, they get their own ship, and they sail off and they dock at this island, and they wait for Telemachus to come back, and their intent to murder him, and then go back and force Penelope to marry one of them and then become king of Ithaca. And so they're sitting there and wait. Telemachus gets back to Pylos, meets with Nestor. They share gifts and treat each other well, and then he gets on his boat to sail home. And he starts sailing home. And that's where you get down here at the end. It says, meanwhile, on Ithaca, the evil suitors plot to kill Telemachus when he returns. And so this story cuts right there. Telemachus's ship has left Pylos and is heading back to Ithaca, and the suitors are waiting to ambush Telemachus and murder him. And so you leave with some tension there. And then the story shifts, and we have the part about Odessius begins. So that was the first 4 books that I summarized for you in sort of a quick way. Now it says Book 5, Calypso, the sweet nymph. For 7 of the 10 years, Odysseus has spent wandering the Mediterranean Sea. He has been held captive by the goddess Calypso on her island. As Book 5 begins, Zeus sends the god Hermes to tell Calypso to release Odysseus. However, she is only to help him build a raft. He must sail for 20 days before landing on the island of Scheria, where he will be helped in his effort to return home. So that's... I don't think there's a lot that we need to say here. Hermes is coming down, and he's going to talk Calypso into letting Odysseus go. Now, I guess we could add that Calypso wants Odysseus to marry her. She's offered him immortality, but he is in love with his wife, Penelope, and his son. He misses his home and he wants to go home. And so Odysseus spends his days sitting on the shore facing Ithaca, so far away over the horizon he can't see it, and crying. In fact, maybe this will help you. This is a map of Odysseus' journeys that I pulled offline. When the story actually starts, Odysseus is on the island of I'm trying to see if Calypso's island right here. It's this little island. So he'd be staring off to the northwest, hoping to see a glimpse of Ithaca, which obviously he can't. It's too far across the Mediterranean for him to possibly see. But he misses his wife and kids. Now, having said that, it is ironic, I guess, that here's his wife, sitting and fending off suitors, not marrying them, and here's Odysseus living for 7 years with Calypso and not marrying her. There's sort of a nice harmony there. The difference is that while Penelope has been completely faithful to Odysseus, Odysseus sleeps with Calypso every night. And I think it says in here, as you're reading it, like he never consented in his heart, whatever that means. But it shows, I think, the double standard of society at the time. You read the Iliad, and Agamemnon and various other married men had mistresses off at Troy, but they expected their wives to be completely faithful to them while they were gone. And that's part of that has to do with kings and royalty and the bloodline, right? Like if you're a queen and you sleep with somebody else, then your kid may not be the kid of the king and therefore may not be heir to the throne, and then you may end up with a civil war. Whereas the king can sleep with as many women as he wants and have children. They're called bastard children that have different moms that are not heir to the throne, but are related to the king. That's no big deal. So it's a little complicated. Anyway, let's read some Odyssey here. No words were lost on Hermes the Wayfinder, who bent to tie his beautiful sandals on, ambrosial golden that carry him over the water, or over endless land and swish of the wind, and took the wand with him, with which he charms asleep, or, when he wills, awake the eyes of men. So wand in hand, he paced into the air, shot from Phaera down to sea level, and veered to skim the swell. A gull, patrolling between the wave crests of the desolate sea, will drop to catch a fish and douse his wings. No higher above the whitecaps Hermes flew, until the distant island lay ahead. Then rising shoreward from the violent ocean, he stepped up to the cave. Divine Calypso, the mistress of the island, was now at home. Upon her hearthstone, a great fire blazing, scented the farthest shores with cedar smoke and smoke of thyme, and singing high and low in her sweet voice before her loom a-weaving, she passed her golden shuttle to and fro. A deep wood grew outside, with summer leaves of alder and black poplar, pungent cypress. Ornate birds here rested their stretched wings, horned owls, falcons, cormorants, long-tongued, beach-combing birds, and followers of the sea. Around the smooth-walled cave, a cooking vine held purple clusters under a ply of green, and 4 springs bubbling up near one another, shallow and clear, took channels here and there through the beds of violets and tender parsley. It's an image of Calypso, I guess. Even a god who found this place would gaze and feel his heart beat with delight. So Hermes did, but when he had gazed his fill, he entered the wide cave. Now face to face, the magical Calypso recognized him, as all immortal gods know one another on sight, though seeming strangers far from home. But he saw nothing of the great Odessius, who sat apart, as 1,000 times before, and racked his own heart, groaning, with eyes wet, scanning the bare horizon of the sea. That skips a little bit for you. Calypso invites Hermes to her table for food and drink, asking why he has come. Hermes explains that he has brought with him an order from Zeus that Calypso must not detain Odysseus any longer, but send him on his way home. She reluctantly obeys, agreeing to offer Odysseus her advice about how to go home. That's good enough. The strong god glittering left her as he spoke, and now her ladyship, having given heed to Zeus's mandate, went to find Odysseus, to his stone seat to seaward. tear on tear brimming in his eyes. The sweet days of his lifetime were running out in anguish over his exile. For long ago the nymph had ceased to please. Though he fought shy of her and her desire, he lay with her each night, for she compelled him. But when day came, he sat on the rocky shore and broke his own heart, groaning, with wet eyes scanning the bare horizon of the sea. Now she stood near him in her beauty, saying, "O forlorn man, be still. Here you need grieve no more. You need not feel your life consumed here. I have pondered it, and I shall help you go." Swiftly she turned and led him to her cave, and they went in, the mortal and the immortal. He took the chair left empty now by Hermes, where the divine Calypso placed before him. Victuals means food. It's a really old word for food. I don't know why I didn't just use food, but whatever. And drink of men, and then sat down facing Odessius, while her serving maids brought nectar and ambrosia to her side. Then each one's hands went out on each one's feast until they had their pleasure, and she said, "Son of Laertes, versatile Odysseus, after these years with me, you still desire your old home? Even so, I wish you well. If you could see it all before you go, all the adversity you face at sea, you would stay here and guard this house and be immortal. Though you wanted her forever, that bride for whom you pine each day, can I be less desirable than she is? Less interesting? Less beautiful? Can mortals compare with goddesses in grace and form?" To this, the strategist Odysseus replied. I like that the adjective here is strategist. She's sort of baiting him. She's trying to get him to insult her in some ways. She's like, "How am I less worthy than your wife, Penelope? I'm a goddess and beautiful, and you could be immortal staying with me." So she's going over the list of reasons why Odysseus should not go home and should stay with her. And he's got to respond. But remember, she's a goddess, so he can't risk insulting her. He's got to be shrewd about it. "My lady goddess, here is no cause for anger. My quiet Penelope, how well I know, would seem a shade before your majesty, death and old age being unknown to you, while she must die. Yet it is true, each day I long for home, long for the sight of home." And then, for whatever reason, they cut this off. With Calypso's help, Odysseus builds a raft and sets out to sea. For 17 days he sails until... Why would they cut it right there? That bothers me. Hold on, I can't do that to you. Give me 1 sec. I'm going to pick up and give you what you missed. To this, the strategist Odysseus answered, "My lady goddess, here is no cause for anger. My quiet Penelope, how well I know, would seem a shade before your majesty, death and old age being unknown to you, while she must die. Yet it is true, each day I long for home, long for the sight of home. If any god has marked me out again for shipwreck, my tough heart can undergo it. What hardship have I not long since endured at sea, in battle? Let the trial come." Now, as he spoke, the sun set, dusk drew on, and they retired, this pair to the inner cave, to revel and rest softly side by side. When dawn had spread out her fingertips of rose, Odysseus pulled his tunic and his cloak on, while the sea nymph, dressed in a silvery gown of subtle tissue, drew about her waist a golden belt and veiled her head, and then took thought for the great-hearted hero's voyage. A brazen axe head first she had to give to him, two-bladed and agreeable to the palm, with smooth-fitting haft of olive wood, next a well-polished adze, and then she led him to the island's tip, where bigger timber grew, besides the alder and the poplar, tall pine trees, long dead and seasoned, that would float him high. Showing him in that place her stand of timber, the loveliest of nymphs took her way home. Now the man fell to chopping. When he paused, 20 tall trees were down. He lopped the branches, split the trunks, and trimmed his raft true. Meanwhile, Calypso brought him an auger tool with which to drill through his planks, then drove stout pins to bolt them, fitted side by side. A master shipwright, building a cargo vessel, lays down a broad and shallow hull. Just so Odysseus shaped the bottom of his craft. He made his decking fast to close-set ribs before he closed the side with longer planking, then cut a mast pole and a proper yard, and shaped steering oar to hold steady. He drove long strands of willow in all the seams to keep out waves, and ballasted with logs. As for sail, the lovely nymph Calypso brought him a cloth so he could make that too. Then he ran up his rigging, halyards, braces, and hauled the boat on rollers to the water. This was the 4th day, when he had all ready. On the 5th day, she sent him out to sea. All right, so that's pretty much what you missed. They try and summarize that, and I don't know why they didn't just put it in there, but whatever. So it says for 17 days he sails. until he is in sight of Scheria. For 3 more days, he is pummeled by storms and finally swims for the island. He makes it safely ashore and crawls to rest under some bushes. Again, it's skipping some kind of exciting things. Uh, Odysseus takes 4 days making the raft, and he takes 17 days sailing. And what's going on is he's getting close to this island that he's trying to get to. But what happens is Poseidon gets done with this festival in Egypt, and he's going home, and he looks across the ocean. He's like, "What? Odysseus!" And so he goes and he sets this giant storm that smashes Odysseus's raft, and he almost drowns. He's being weighed down by this nice robe that Calypso gave him, so he ends up taking it off, and Odysseus ends up naked. And he's swimming through this horrible storm naked. He finally makes it to this cliff, and he climbs up the cliff through really difficult situations. He's covered with salt and salt water and brine, but he's so exhausted that all he can do is sort of stagger off into the woods and fall down in some leaves and cover himself over so that he doesn't freeze. And that's pretty much where this leaves you off. So now we're going to pick up again. A man in a distant field, no hearth fires near, will hide a fresh brand in his bed of embers to keep the spark alive for the next day. So in the leaves Odysseus hid himself, while over him Athena showered sleep that his distress should end. And soon, in quiet sleep she sealed his cherished eyes. Book 9, New Coats in Poseidon's Sun. In books 6 to 8, oh God, all right, whatever. Odysseus is welcomed by King Alcinous, who gives a banquet in his honor. That night, the king begs Odysseus to tell who he is and what happened to him. In books 9 to 12, Odysseus relates to the king his adventure. Yeah, okay, so they're skipping books 6 to 8 as well. We just don't have time to read the whole thing, and I hate that I'm sitting here summarizing huge chunks of it for you. But we'll get you up to book 8, and then we'll stop this video because it's already 26 minutes long, and like I said, I want to have it be about a half an hour. So in what happens next to Odysseus, and what we're getting in some of these scenes is we're seeing Odysseus's attributes, his intelligence, his strength. I mean, him swimming in the ocean for days and then climbing a cliff after he finally gets out of the storm shows his strength, his tenacity, his some of these abilities. And then we're going to showcase some other abilities of Odysseus in books 6 to 8. So he wakes up in the leaves there under the tree because he hears singing, and it turns out that the king of this place, Phaeacia, is a guy named Alcinous, and his daughter and a number of other women from his household are down in the brook at the bottom of this ravine washing clothes. And Odysseus wakes up and he realizes he needs their help, but they're all women, and he is sort of a wild-haired 40-year-old naked man, right? And he's like, oh God, what am I going to do? I can't just walk down the hill and be like, hey, I need some help. They're going to run away, or they're going to think he's a rapist or something, and he's going to have all kinds of negative consequences. So he has to think about how he's going to address this situation. So he gets a branch with a bunch of leaves and holds it over his nakedness, and he calls to them from a long distance, and a number of them do run away, but Athena puts strength into the king's daughter, puts courage into the king's daughter, Nausicaa. And Nausicaa stays, and Odysseus talks to her. And she realizes, after Odysseus talks in such lordly, intelligent, and properly humble ways to her, that he is a person of renown and culture. And so she gives him some clothes, and she offers to take him back to her father Alcinous's palace. But Odysseus is smart enough to know that he can't just go back with Nausicaa to Alcinous's palace, because if Alcinous's daughter shows up alone with a guy, there's going to be rumors about Nausicaa and Odysseus and what they may or may not have been doing. And so he suggests to her that instead he wait an hour or two until the evening light is coming down before he goes by himself to Alcinous's palace to ask for a meal. And so she agrees and she leaves. And then Odysseus himself comes later and is greeted and accepted in Alcinous's palace. And then Alcinous has a banquet. And, before he even asks Odysseus what his name is or what he's doing, he treats him to food and gives him gifts and makes him very comfortable. But Alcinous is sort of a really interesting fellow too. There's a song, a harpist or whatever you want to call it, a poet who sings songs of the Trojan War. And while he's singing these songs of the Trojan War, Odysseus starts crying, and Alcinous notices this, and he thinks he must have a guy who's a veteran of the Trojan War there with him, with some strong memories about it. And so eventually he asks Odysseus, "Who are you?" And Odysseus tells him, and this is going to kick off the next section of the story, which is going to have a narrator change. Up until this point, the entire story has had this third person storyteller voice. And then as soon as book 9 opens, you get Odysseus who's starting to tell his own story, and it's sort of a flashback. You're going to rewind to immediately at the end of the Trojan War, and you're going to track through all of Odysseus's journeys as it goes through, and he's going to be telling it in his own voice. So the storyteller is now taking on the storytelling voice of Odysseus himself, and this makes it a little more complicated. You can start thinking about why Odysseus chooses to tell the tales that he tells, and why he tells them in the way that he does, and why he puts an emphasis, for example, on hospitality and treating guests right. It's because he's a guest in somebody else's house telling this story. And so you get a little bit of the unreliable narrator thing going on here, because Odysseus himself is telling his own story, but he's telling it for a particular reason and to a particular audience. And so it's a little complicated as a narrative style or a narrative trick. But that's where we're going to pick up in the next video. We will start with Odysseus himself telling his own narration of his adventures. Meanwhile, of course, while all this is going on, Telemachus is on his way home, and remember that he's going to get murdered by the suitors. So we have that on hold as well, and things are sort of coming together. Anybody who has questions, please ask. I am more than happy to answer them. Just type it in the comments below, or unmute yourself and ask.